Good morning. I'd like to welcome you back to another edition of our Anchored in the Word morning reflection. And it's been a great week of study. I think it's a challenging topic. It's one that really shapes our perspective. And I don't know about you, but as I was looking through this passage of Scripture in preparation for Sunday's sermon and then reviewing over it again this week, there's a lot of great practical challenges for us. And it really meets us right in the heart of where we are as Christians, as we are involved in ministering to others, serving the Lord. It really helps shape our perspective. And so the text that we've been in this week is Luke chapter 9, verses 46 through 56. I'm going to read it again, and then I'd like to just pick right back up where we left off. We were looking at the life of Peter and how the Lord was working both in him and through him. And I'd like us to kind of look at some implications that are connected to what we talked about yesterday. Luke chapter 9, verse 46 says the following. Then there arose a reasoning among them, which of them should be the greatest. And Jesus, perceiving the thoughts of their heart, took a child and set him by him, and said unto them, Whosoever shall receive this child in my name receiveth me. Whosoever shall receive me receiveth him that sent me. For he that is least among you all, the same shall be great. John answered and said, Master, we saw one casting out devils in thy name, and forbid him, because he followeth not with us. Jesus said unto him, Forbid him not. For he that is not against us is for us. It came to pass, when the time was come that he should be received up, he steadfastly set his face to go to Jerusalem, and set messengers before his face, and they went and entered into a village of the Samaritans to make ready for him. And they did not receive him, because his face was as though he would go to Jerusalem. And when the disciples James and John saw this, they said, Lord, wilt thou that we command fire to come down from heaven and consume them, even as Elias did? And he turned and rebuked them and said, Ye know not what manner of spirit you are of. For the Son of Man is not come to destroy men's lives, but to save them. And they went to another village. Now, if you remember yesterday, we talked about Peter's life. And Peter's life could really be summarized with this statement. The gospel's power is self-authenticating. And Peter's life is a perfect example of the self-authenticating power of the gospel. When we look at his life and the lives of the other disciples, what we ultimately see is that the church's very existence is not a testimony to the greatness of the men that Jesus used to build the church. It is a testimony to the greatness of God. It's God's grace. It's God's patience. It's God's power. It's God's wisdom. It's God's persistence. That is what ultimately builds the church. And we go back to the passage that we mentioned on the first day this week. Jesus says, I will build my church. The gates of hell shall not prevail against it. Or in 2 Corinthians, it says, I've planted, Apollos watered. God gave the increase. We're just ministers through whom you have believed. God is the one who does the work. It is his faithfulness that builds the church, sustains the church, and ultimately preserves the church from one generation to the next generation. And when God saves a person, he literally transforms them in a way that completely goes against human reasoning or logic or expectation. When you look at a person who's not a believer, sometimes you go, this is a person who'd never believe. This is a person that even if they did believe, their life really will never be transformed by this message. And we sort of analyze someone through human understanding. But when we look at Peter, no one would have picked him to be this great apostle to the Jews. But Jesus picked him because Jesus knew what Peter would become as he worked in him and through him. And he knew what Peter was capable of by the grace of God and his sustaining hand. And so when we talk about the gospel literally transforms us in an absolutely unmistakable way. And this transformation is something that simply gives us a reminder that there's nothing in the world that can do this but the gospel. I remind you, Jesus promised he would build his church. He demonstrated in this passage that he has been building his church. And here we are, over 2,000 years later, he is still building his church, and the gates of hell are not prevailing against it. God has purposed to work through the fallible human instruments that are available to him. And you and I should take tremendous comfort in the fact that he can work through us in the same way that he worked through them. And you and I should be very humbled at the fact that the reason that we are used by God is not because of our wisdom and our strength and our abilities as much as it is about his grace and his faithfulness and his power and his love for the world. The book of Acts demonstrates this practical working out, and the Gospels demonstrate this practical working out, that God could take people who were proud and he could make them humble. And God could take people that were weak and he could make them strong. And God took people who were fearful and he could make them bold. And God took people who had great prejudices and he could make them loving people who were willing to cross cultural boundaries, go to people that were unloved by those within their culture, their peers, and they could love them and they could connect with them and they could preach the gospel with them and they could be united into the same body together. He took obscure people who were fishermen from the regions of Galilee, and he literally transformed the nations through these people that had been previously untrained. Folks, if God can do this in these people's lives, he's the same God today. He can do this work in us and through us as he did in them and through them. You say, Pastor Joel, what is the takeaway? The takeaway is this: the building of the church of God is a great miracle. And you and I have the privilege as God's people to be able to participate in this work, to be able to see this work going on around us. We can rejoice in the tremendous goodness and wisdom of God. I hope that leaves you tremendously encouraged this morning. If this has been a challenge to you, please share that. Perhaps share it with somebody that can be encouraged by it. And Lord willing, we'll close out our week tomorrow with some final thoughts on this passage of Scripture. Bye now.